Welcome back, I am John P. Today we are going to be talking about the Nivada Grenchen Depthmaster. Yes, that's right, this is a watch brand that's been revitalized. It's changed hands in ownership through quite literally decades and decades, but some things remain the same, and that is going to be a couple of the models which we have here today, the Nivada Grenchen Depthmaster, as well as there are some chronographs that have survived kind of the test of times in terms of the styling for when the watch was originally released. So we're going to be talking about this. We're going to go under the camera lens, get you a better view of this particular watch. And I'm also going to let you know what I think about this particular watch, also called the Baby Panerai, by the way. And that kind of leads me into a disclaimer that I don't typically take in watches from brands and do reviews, right? Because I have Del Rey Watch with my business partner Federico from Federico Talks Watches, we just have access to so many cool, interesting watches, and we just really don't have to take in watches. So if I'm sharing a watch with you, I think it should go without saying, but I will say it, that I do think there is a lot of positives in this watch. So a little foreshadowing of what is to come, but don't worry, I will be tough on it in just one category, but we'll save that for later. I just love this, the way that this looks. And by the way, this is modeled after the original Nivada Grenchen Baby Panerai. This is going to be the Depthmaster, the original that was debuted in about 1965. And when this came out, it was really revolutionary and mind-blowing for people back then because it featured 1,000 meter water resistance. It did that in a couple of different ways, but it was so far ahead of the times. And it was able to achieve that mostly because of the cushioning case, the way that it was constructed, and a couple of other features in the design and the construction of the actual case. And that is really what Nivada Grenchen is known for, right? They also have some chronograph models, which we'll probably talk about in the future because we happen to have them at Del Rey Watch, delreywatch.com. So I'll probably talk about it in the future. If you are interested, leave that in the comments below. But this is really the watch that I love, the original, the 1965 or thereafter version of the watch, also known to collectors as the Baby Panerai for kind of that smaller, more diminutive or more junior, I guess you'd say, case size and presence, which I really love because if you follow the channel, you know that I have a smaller wrist. But the reality is the originals just don't pop up very often. If they do, they're under the name Croton, which, you know, is just a name that was used in different markets essentially by Nivada Grenchen, and now it's a different company which holds different weight today, much different than Nivada Grenchen does. So typically you don't see the originals pop up too often under the Nivada name, but I really love that watch. I used to see it all the time in my earliest days of vintage watch collecting. So I really do enjoy seeing brands come out with originals here, and I think it's very rare to see something like that in the price point, particularly for this watch. And we will cover that in just a second. But guys, please do not forget the thumbs up, like, and subscribe. I really do appreciate it. And you can find me on Instagram, TheRealJohnP, and also SinclairStraps.com for the best premium watch straps. So let's change the camera angle and show you a little bit more of the Nivada Grenchen Depthmaster. So here we have the Nivada Grenchen Depthmaster, and the first presence, in my opinion, is actually quite nice. I will say that holding the watch, it has quite decent and substantial heft to it, even though the case size is clocking in at 39 millimeters, but it's 316L steel, which is going to add to the overall feeling and the quality of this particular watch. You'll notice that there's a mixture of brushing and polishing, giving it a sporty, yet a little bit more refined look. I would say certainly more refined than the original Nivada Depthmaster, but the other thing to keep in mind is this is about 1 millimeter larger than the original Nivada Depthmaster, so it is more of that vintage style reissue type of watch, but in a modern context. With that modern context, we have, of course, a sapphire crystal, which you just really have to have, at least in my opinion, in the opinion of many watch collectors, right? You need a sapphire crystal just to be a good marketable product today, which they have here, so we're good. Moving us into under the sapphire crystal, we have this dial I really love this dial. Now, this dial particularly is called the Pac-Man dial. If you look at some of the indices, particularly at the 6 and the 9 o'clock, it's kind of reminiscent of Pac-Man. You got that kind of edgy styling on the indices, which I think is super cool. And that's something you saw in the original. That's something you see today. And with these indices, it's also very important to notice that these are super luminova. So it's going to be extra bright. It's going to shine in the night. And that's something, once again, I don't see a lot of the time at particularly this price point, which we will mention at the end. But of course, this watch also features an impressive 1,000-meter water resistance, much like the original, with not only a screw-down crown, it features a screw-down caseback, much like you'd see on some of the earlier and original Panerais, the true Panerais, as well as a helium escape valve. So it's really meant to be a tool, a sporty, and a diving watch, much like the original. Now, many of you watch geeks and savants, much like myself, are going to care about what is the movement. What is the movement? The movement is a Sellita SW200 with the date version. Now, this is going to be pretty normal for Swiss luxury watches or luxury watches under that $2,000 price point, but even you'll see Sellita movements, maybe a little bit higher grade, but SW200 or equivalent nonetheless in watches for $5,000. And it makes sense because it is a workhorse movement. This one features the date, so I think it is certainly more than sufficient, and many top Swiss brands will tell you that as well. Now, let's not forget that this is a Swiss watch. It's designated Swiss. It's true to the original brand, and that is something that they've driven home, whereas a lot of reissue brands maybe don't do that. And I will say, now the time is probably right to tell you that this watch retail price on the bracelet clocks in at about $1,200 US and some change. So what do I think? Now, I've shared with you the specs, a little bit about why I personally like it. It has that vintage original case style, the baby Panerai kind of saying. I also like kind of the indices with the Pac-Man on it. That's very cool and enjoyable for me, and I like to see that in a reissue, see a brand really take note of their history and heritage and put that in a watch that's roughly $1,200 US, and that's not something that happens all the time, right? When you think of a Microbrand, these are new companies, but this person got the licensing, or these people, these investors got the licensing, they put together a brand, and they took the original stylings of a true collectible vintage watch, the baby Panerai as it's called, and they also did not spare any expense when it comes to the actual functionality and the utility value on this watch. There's super lume, right? That's pretty great. Vintage reissue watches could easily go without that, and many people would probably not even realize that, right? I think at this segment, sometimes that is the norm. Additionally, they did do just a great job with the water resistance, keeping it to the original 1,000 meters, which I think is pretty impressive considering a watch in the segment, the Doxa Sub 200, is not even close to that. Now, this isn't something that you really need, but the fact that they did that and were able to achieve this and test for it at this roughly $1,200 US price point, I think is pretty amazing. And generally, the watch has a lot of heft to it. I like it. It's handsome. It looks a lot like the original, and it looks like something you would get, and it feels like something you would get at a price that is higher. Now, I don't want this to seem like I am pushing the brand in any one direction, right? There are some things that I think that I'd like to see them improve on in the future. I will say, once again, I really do enjoy this watch, but particularly one thing, now it's with the clasp overall in the bracelet, I think the actual sides of the bracelet are really great, right? I think it's quite honestly better than the bracelets that are offered on the Doxa Sub 200, which is something I'm kind of directly comparing this to. I believe I did a video on this. If not, I'll have to resurface that and put the link in the description below. But the only thing I could truly find problematic, unfortunately, with this watch is the inside of the clasp is just something that I wouldn't expect for this style of bracelet, right? I'll try to put a picture here, but if not, basically the inside of the clasp is just a little bit thinner metal than the rest of the bracelet, and so it does kind of feel like they could have put just a tad more effort into that part of the bracelet. But once again, that's not something that is uncommon at this price point, and this is also something that I do see at higher price points. But as I talk about this watch, as I review it, I truly am forgetting that the price point that it's coming delivered at, right? This is something I have to remind myself because it is an iconic case style, this cushion case style, the baby Panerai, and the quality really is here. Just holding it here, the dial pops in such a way with the contrast of the white indices, the Pac-Man, as well as the black dial. It just looks cool, it feels modern, and that's something a reissue has to have. Now, one last thing with the bracelet before I forget. Now, I have a very small wrist, right? Very small wrist, 6.25 at this point, inches in circumference. And the reality is the edges of this bracelet, they kind of pop out. So the end links, they pop out a little bit and they're not angled down. Now, I see why they did this. They probably did this to add more wrist length to increase the lug-to-lug, right? So if the end links pop out a little bit longer, that for almost most people, if not nearly all people, unless you have a 6.25 inch wrist or thereabout, it's going to be great and it's probably going to make for a more comfortable wear. But for me particularly, the lug-to-lug is just ever so slightly larger than I personally enjoy. But once again, I'm skewed on that lower end of the wrist size category, or the spectrum rather. So if your wrist is larger than 6.5 inches, this is probably going to be a very comfortable feature. But if for some reason your wrist is under that 6.5 inch in circumference, depending on the other the specs there in terms of the length, the width, all that stuff with the wrist, it could be problematic on this particular bracelet, in which case they do offer the watch on leather straps as well as rubber. So that's probably something I would opt in for. I think I'm personally probably going to be wearing this watch on a rubber or maybe a Sinclair strap, a leather strap, sinclairstraps.com. So they do offer it in those different stylings for someone that maybe the bracelet doesn't work for, but that's something that's very common not only in watches in this price point and category, but also quite literally every price point and category. So I'm really nitpicking here to find something that I can talk about that is not overwhelmingly positive. But I think in summation, I would truly say that this is a great reissue of a classic vintage watch that truly probably has not reached its heyday in terms of collectability. But if you go to their website, the Nivada Grenchen website, you can you can really see for yourself that they seem to have sold out of many, if not most, renditions of this watch. So I know some people are going to be looking for this. Check out their website, Nivada Grenchen, and look up the Depthmaster. I think you'll be pretty happy if this is a watch you're looking for or a segment you're looking to get a piece in. But what do you guys think? Do any of you own the Nivada Grenchen Depthmaster? I would love to see it and hear it in the comments below. Please do not forget to thumbs up, like, and subscribe. I really do appreciate it. You can find me on Instagram, TheRealJohnP. And guys, don't forget to check out SinclairStraps.com. Thanks, guys. You've been chatting with John P.